Hey, what's up, guys? Chimp here, and I wanted to record another market update. It's been a couple days. Sort of just giving my thoughts where I think the market's at and where I think we could be going, and my general thoughts here. So I'll start with the macro, and then I'll go more into crypto. So if you don't want to hear about the macro, just skip ahead a couple of minutes. But I want to start by talking about macro, and it seems like once every couple months, macro sort of takes the reins, and everyone's sort of attention gets on the macro, and people start making trades one way or another because of the quote unquote macro. So let's talk a little bit about it. And we've heard a lot of reasons sell over the last 5 years because of macro. We've had the COVID crash, right? We've had, and some of these moves have been more protracted, and some of these moves have been much more acute. We had the COVID crash here. We had inflation fears and interest rates and QT, back in basically 2022, where people were like panicking because of that. And then more recently, we've had like this tariff scare, right? So we've had a couple different sort of scares, and every single time it's sort of rebounded, right? I remember people telling me, "Hey, what are you going to do when the S&P hits 3,200?" And it never hit 3,200 back in 2022. What are you going to do when the power lines and the water is going to get cut off back in 2020? And that didn't happen. What are you going to do when um, the tariffs crash the global economy and the dollar loses its reserve currency status and everything just goes to hell? You know, none of these fears have really taken hold. And not to say that they can or can't, but what I'm trying to say is that no one really knows. I think, like, for the most part, no one really knows what's going on, right? And you can tell that from like fund returns. Like, you have like Renaissance, who's like one of the biggest killers, like down year to date, right? So no one can really predict this stuff. And I remember everyone saying like, "Hey, markets can't go up as long as the Fed is raising rates and QT is happening." And what happened? The Nasdaq went from 10,000 to 22,000 in an environment where interest rates were between 4 and 5.5%. So what is my point? And what is like my general thoughts about macro and how it relates to crypto? Macro moves on something like the Nasdaq affects crypto in the sense that it causes short-term correlation buying or selling. So, like, what happened when you looked at the correlation buying and selling from these tariffs? Great question. What happened was initially you got a lot of parallel outflows with these big like TradFi sell-offs, right? Whenever the market would go down, ETFs would outflow in a big way, and but what happened after a couple of weeks of that? It sort of just stopped. And even though the market like mega tanked, right? We the Nasdaq dumped to 16.4. Like there were barely any Bitcoin outflows, right? So sorry if I said inflows earlier, I meant outflows. Um, so you might get correlation initially, right? Like Nasdaq dumps, these funds that are sort of uh, are price sensitive just decide to sell everything, which includes like Bitcoin ETFs or whatever. But once that initial wave is done, which maybe takes 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever, then the market resets and there's not really as many marginal Bitcoin sellers. And that's basically what we saw, right? Bitcoin went to 76.7 when the Nasdaq was trading like, I want to say, it's been a minute. I want to say Bitcoin, we'll double check these numbers, but I want to say Bitcoin went to 76.7 when Nasdaq traded near 19,000. And the Nasdaq just hyper collapsed to 16.4, and Bitcoin basically traded below those lows for all of an hour, right? Traded maybe an hour below those lows like twice, and then it auto bounced. So there's that with like the Nasdaq and whatnot. I think people are like way too focused on it, and I think like when you look at how Bitcoin's trading and all these like relative strength sort of metrics, like crypto's clearly outperforming. Let's look at gold, and I just want to use gold sort of to speak to a narrative, which is gold making basically all-time high after all-time high. What is this telling you? It's telling you the world is looking for non-US based assets. People in the US sort of have this like, I don't want to say naive view, but they have this like what is it? They call it a heliocentric model of the universe. Like they have that heliocentric view of themselves, like, hey, everything revolves around us. And maybe it does to some degree, but there's a lot of wealth and a lot of big players outside the US. And just because US stocks are doing one thing doesn't mean, or the US dollar is doing one thing, like they might just say, screw the US, I just want to go into something that's much more of a hedge or sort of an alternate asset class. And that's where gold comes in. And I show this chart to say that, like, there's no reason why Bitcoin eventually can't pull something like this. And I think Bitcoin is doing this actually. I think when you look at how Bitcoin has traded since the start of 2023, it's been going up in basically you know, virtually a straight line, but you've just had lags and pauses. So I bring up gold to say that if this was like a global bear market and everything's going to zero, you would expect gold to be dumping, right? But gold's going up, which tells you that a lot of big money around the globe, both in the US and outside the US, is looking at these sorts of asset classes and putting money in. Okay, done, now that the macro spiel is done for, let's talk a little about Bitcoin because I think that's probably why most people are tuning in. And Bitcoin has, we had these two dives down to 74, and we're sort of just climbing up. And what are my thoughts here? I would be very surprised if we break down. So like if this thing totally reverses and we just go into the mid 60s, I'd be very surprised for a couple of reasons. I think the 75 level is like key in terms of like a support resistance flip. So like if you just draw like very basic, like, hey, where was resistance? Where should support be? It's basically where that was. And these sort of support resistance flips have been like very good at calling bottoms historically with Bitcoin. So I think this sort of support resistance flip, and again, like you saw something actually very similar back in 2023. Like these sort of support resistance flips, I think are very strong and they're very unlikely to be broken. So I think like a dive below this level would be actually very rare or very unlikely. I could sort of see two scenarios playing out. Like if TradFi ends up puking, I could see us making a higher low, like we end up dumping, let's say to 80 or 79 or 81 or 82. Like basically like if, and why do I say this? Like there is some open interest that's built up that is that could get washed. So like there is a chance I could see where like you dump to 79 or 80 or 81. I think if like you missed the dip, like those would be interesting spots to get in. But my base case is like, look, we've been downtrending for 3 months. We sort of broke, quote unquote, broke down like end of Feb. And if you want to like be more pedantic about it, early March. And so like we've had a month and a half for people who like wanted to sell in this like bottom range. Clearly, like no one's leverage longed, right? You're making these new lows, and by the way, what's a good sign that no one's leverage long? When you start making new lows and like they basically auto rebound, because like when the market's very leveraged and you just have a puke out, typically speaking, you don't get an auto rebound. Typically speaking, like the market sells off, maybe you get some retests of prior levels, and then like it levels out. You're getting these lows, like, and by the way, this is something that I noticed in the summer as well. Like, you kept getting these sort of new lows, but they were like basically very like short-lived in some ways. And so I think like we're seeing something similar here. Again, I think like if people find a reason to be bearish, I'm not saying like the Nasdaq even dumping is necessarily giga bearish. Like if people find a reason to be bearish, like you could get a dip and it goes up, but I could also just see a situation where we sort of just start trending up. And look, what's a I could talk about a bunch of relative strength sort of metrics, but like what's one of them? It's like here's one of them, one of many. Like Saylor has not bought in 2 weeks, right? Like he bought last week, but it was like $300 million. Like basically very little relative to what he usually buys. And the market has just been floating up. So there's like a bid in this market which is happily ready to buy Bitcoin sub 80, and it's been pushing the price up. and we know it's not Saylor, right? So there's big forces out there working. And in some ways, Saylor did his job. Like he bought what 30,000 Bitcoin in this range. He's probably absorbed a lot of that price sensitive selling just by him like taking these loans and absorbing that supply. And like yeah, later down the road, Saylor could become a liability, but as of right now, he's basically putting a price dampener on the price. He's putting a price dampener on supply coming in and selling, and or rather, he's done that. So that's one reason. What's another reason to be bullish? Uh, Another one is like let's look at alts, right? Let's look at Solana, just out of example. Solana was at 130 when Bitcoin was trading at like 49K, 55K, whatever. Bitcoin's now at 85K, and Solana's at the same price. Like these alts are just getting destroyed, right? Like I can pull up another example, TIA. TIA went as high as $9 in December. You had some mega bounces on TIA, right? Like TIA went from 230 to basically 450. You've had these mega bounces, but like where is it now? It's at range lows, right? What's like the more grifty examples? Melania, right? Like someone asked me about Melania, like does this thing gonna ever rebound? I don't see a world where this thing, if it does rebound, if it does pump for some reason, like it's just gonna get auto smacked down again. But like look at Melania, right? Like literally making a new low every day. Like the grift train, like grift maxing. Look at Trump, right? Like 805. Like Bitcoin is trending up. This shit's fucking all trending down. So all these scams are trending down, and you have two exceptions, right? And the question is like, what is the broader trend? Are most things trending up or trending down? So I can think of two exceptions to tickers that are trending down. Like one is Fartcoin, which I think makes sense. Like it doesn't make sense to have a world where 20 memes are worth a bill each, but it makes sense to have one meme that's worth 1 bill or 2 bill or 3 bill. And in a world where you had Peanut and you had like I don't even know what some of the stuff what I was like spawning like Moodang like whatever all these meme names were spawning, it doesn't make sense to have a world where you have all those tickers doing well, but it does make a lot of sense to have a world where like one ticker is doing well, and that's totally fine in my opinion. What's the second one? Hype. Why is Hype doing well? Well, again, exception, not the norm, and Hype has like a product behind it. They have like insane revenues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it makes total sense why something like a Hype is doing well. But again, are these exceptions or are these the norm? Like 95% of alts, if I had to guess, are like showing a lot of signs of underperformance. And like, yeah, you locally have signs of outperformance in like two of them. So I think when you look at that as a whole, like, yeah, the market's pretty deleveraged. And there isn't like, and the question is again, like, where is the froth meter at? Is everyone like, for lack of a better word, like rolling the dice and like gambling their fortunes on like, you know, the like on fate, or are people pretty deleveraged and like markets just there's not much risk in the market? And I think based on what I just talked about with alts, like evidence very strongly points towards the latter in that case. One other thing I want to talk about in this video before I call it a wrap is Mantra. I don't know if it's on here. I think it is. I don't even know what this token is. Like I wasn't following too closely, but typically, like this is one thing I like to think about in terms of markets. Typically, like if markets are weak, some scam blowing up is enough to like shake confidence and cause like a lot of deleveraging. But when markets are strong, like you could have one thing blow up or something something come out and you get like a very minor setback. But as a whole, like the market keeps rolling. And so like what's an example of that? Like the Bitfinex deal, like the Bitfinex Southern New York announcement, like May 1st of 2019. Like Bitcoin dumps 10%, then just keeps on rolling upwards. Same thing here, but like in this case, it's an alt. What's an opposite example of that? Luna blowing up. Luna blows up, the entire market immediately goes to shit. This multi-billion-dollar coin blows up. Yeah, like a lot of people who had this lost wealth, but is Bitcoin dumping? No, Bitcoin's doing totally fine. So like that's again another example of, hey, like there's like small bombs going off in this market, small explosions or whatever, but the market is like absorbing these explosions quite well. And so again, I think that's another sign that things are pretty bullish. So what's my base case for Bitcoin here? If you ask me, like, is it going to go up 2,000 or down 2,000 next? I don't know. Could we go to 80? Like, what do I think is probably off the table? I think the lows are probably off the table. I think 75 would be I'd be very surprised if we go back under 75. If we go back under 80, I think that's a possibility. Uh, do I think it's super high? Probably not. But it's there. Like I think there's a real probability of that. I think ultimately we are going to be talking about Bitcoin back in the 90s, and ultimately I think we are going to be talking about Bitcoin back at all-time highs if we're sitting in a market regime where things are already pretty deleveraged. So, overall, like I'm leaning bullish, but let's just wait and see what happens. If Bitcoin ends up making a move down, I'll make another video and I'll sort of like reanalyze what I talked about. We can look at more specific details, like looking at on exchange open interest and whatnot to sort of decipher to see like, hey, is this move done? But yeah, I'm leaning bullish here, and let's see how it plays out. Just some closing thoughts here. One, if you guys enjoy the video, please like, please comment, please subscribe. Like, my channel is small, as they say, so any comments you leave, like, I'll reply to them. And then second, like, if you have feedback, you want me to cover something in the next video, I'm going to go over anything, like, just let me know. I'm more than open to it. Doing these are pretty fun, to be honest. Like, I enjoy doing the last one. I'm enjoying doing this one. So as long as I keep enjoying it, and as long as I keep getting some positive feedback, like, I'm going to keep doing them. And sometimes I might do them like daily if markets are moving like crazy. Other times maybe I'll do them once every couple days or once a week. I don't know yet. So anyways, we'll see what happens. Those are sort of my thoughts here. And until next time, take care, guys.